Knowledge workers have long sought for the elusive conversation with their data. That dream is finally here. Thanks to amazing advances in AI, coupled with proven data management techniques, businesses can now talk to their data like never before. Learn more on this episode of Future Proof.
The future is here already. It's just not evenly distributed. Yet. Today's world teems with innovation. The nexus of hardware, software, and human ingenuity promises a revolution in possibilities. What does tomorrow look like? Witness Future Proof.
We have two excellent guests for you today, folks. We'll be talking to Alex Kangoun of Athena Solutions and Ryan Welsh of Qlik, Field CTO for Generative AI. And of course, Alex is the CEO of Athena. And we're going to talk about one of the absolute hottest topics in the industry. And, to put it all in context, and we're talking about AI, of course, large language models. To put it all in context, just before the show, I thought to myself, years and years ago, I wrote my dissertation in college for my philosophy degree and my English degree on a work of art. It was a play by Edward Albee called The Zoo Story. And there's one line in there that I think really reflects what we're seeing in this industry today. He says, sometimes it is necessary to go a long distance out of the way in order to come back a short distance correctly. I remember reading that when I was like 17. I was like, wow, that's pretty deep. What is that guy talking about? It took years to kind of figure out. But when I think about the evolution of this industry of business intelligence and decision support, analytics, business analytics, that's kind of where I think we are right now, because we've spent this last 40 years or so mastering structured data and things like data warehouses, for example, and analytic solutions. Business intelligence sits on top of a data warehouse, OLAP cubes, all these interesting machinations we've come up with to be able to facilitate the ingest, the cleansing, the organizing, and the analysis of data to get better decisions. That's structured data. All of that is for structured data. So data in relational databases, in tables, for example, very structured view of the world. Well, what we didn't conquer was the unstructured data, and that is typically 80% or more of all the enterprise data in an organization. It's not that we haven't tried over the years. There were tools like SharePoint, for example, was kind of designed to give access. It was just a complicated folder system as far as I was concerned. I've never been a big fan of SharePoint. But I got where they were getting. They were trying to give you access to it. And I remember this thing called knowledge management way back in the day, like 30 plus years ago. We talked about knowledge management. It sounded so exciting, and it went nowhere. Basically, it was just very difficult. We didn't have the computational power. We didn't have the algorithms. We didn't have the expertise. We didn't have the cheap storage or the fast processors or all these different things that have come together in the last few years. But guess what? We have them now. We can do these amazing things. And there are technologies like natural language processing. NLP is not new. It's been around for decades, but it's gotten very good in the last few decades, in large part due to these transformer models. And before the show, we were talking about Dr. Craig Schmidhuber, who wrote these papers on the transformers in the 1990s. So way back when he wrote these papers. And only recently, a few years ago, did we have the computational power to leverage what he was talking about and what he was trying to explain. And now we have it. And so Gen AI comes out. Really, its main debut was last year, but it's not just from last year. It's been around for a number of years as well, probably 6, 7 years. They've been working on these GPT things. But ChatGPT, of course, through Microsoft, has now just dominated conversations. And in fact, we just saw something I predicted. I'm going to pat myself on the back. I remember all this talk of Google ending cookies, and cookies are going to go away. Third-party cookies are going away. I'm like, I don't know if that's going to happen. I think they're going to think twice about that. And then what happened? Now they're like, oh, well, maybe we're not going to go down that road because there's a $600 billion advertising industry that hinges on that stuff. And the other factor, I think, is that Google is now really concerned by ChatGPT and Microsoft, that alliance. Yes, they have Gemini. Google has Gemini. But man, let me tell you, ChatGPT blew the minds of people, and lots of cool things are happening. Well, to bring that all together, just like Edward Albee said, come back a short distance correctly. Here we are today with a new technology. It's called Qlik Answers. It comes from a company called Kindy, and Ryan was working on that a long time ago. So maybe I'll start with you, Ryan Welsh of Qlik. we have come a long way in a short period of time, and all of a sudden the entire world has changed. And you had mentioned in our webinar a moment ago how there's a huge difference between getting a result set from a Google search and getting the answer that you're looking for. And that's the chasm we've just jumped across, right, Ryan?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we've gone from a world where you type in keywords, get a list of search results, click on the links, sift your way through, maybe find an answer. We've gone from that world to ask a question, get a direct, contextually relevant, trustworthy answer instantly.
Yeah, that's a big,
It's
that's a big
pretty
difference.
profound change. Yeah.
Well, and then if you look at the downside, it's still, there's a trust component that is being solved. And I remember when I took a demo of Kindy, gosh, it's got to be 6 or 7 months ago, maybe 8 months ago. And I realized these folks have solved that problem because you cite the sources. So the challenge with large language models is that if you ask it a question and the model has not been trained on enough relevant data for that specific query, then it starts getting a bit wonky and it sort of makes stuff up. But as the go-to-market guy for OpenAI said to me in a tweet one day, remember, that's more of a feature than a bug, right? It's generative AI. It's generative in that it creates new text. But what you folks have done is made sure that you're citing where in the text you got that information and including that in the answer. So it's like you're giving credit where credit is due, right, Ryan?
Exactly, and it does depend on the use case too. So in some instances, these hallucinations, people call them, when systems make stuff up, is a feature, not a bug. So if you're trying to create creative marketing content, it's very helpful if the system can come up with something, unique and creative. But when you're trying to get direct answers to very important business questions, it's not good when a system makes something up.
Right.
and so when you focus on that very specific use case of helping business users get trustworthy answers to their business questions, you can then start to design systems that overcome kind of the bigger challenges of generative AI.
Yeah. And maybe Alex Kangoun, I'll bring you in from Athena Solutions. You've been in this industry for 20 odd years, so you've seen where we've come from. Would you agree that the leap we have made in the recent past, I should be careful not to use the word quantum because everyone think I'm talking about quantum computing. No, but it is a bit of a quantum leap that we've taken in just the last few years. What do you think, Alex?
Like on the previous event, like Ryan mentioned, put the slide where it's like quick answer is easy, but then that's difficult part.
Right.
I've been through this difficult part. I've been through for like object OCR scanning, trying to figure out where's the data, gluing multiple vendors together so it will come up with a solution. Talk to technology. So I lived through this round bottom part where it's like difficult life. So I'm excited to see there, and what I have there, not everything in the bottom part, not everything in the old days, not everything was made. There were like tools where you can plug it in and it will work. Like for example, the document scanning, document classification. So there are like some elements of this of automation were already included, but I don't think it was like ever end-to-end solution.
Yeah, and that's the key, right? Maybe Ryan, I'll throw it back over to you. End to end is really important because when you miss one little chunk, that winds up being where you get most of your problems. So to have that end to end solution, and there's still going to be effort required to set up these systems, to curate them, for example. But that point Alex just made about end to end, that's a really big deal, right, Ryan?
Yeah, it's very important because there's just significant downstream effects if you get something wrong. And candidly, like when people start going in and trying to build these systems themselves, you may be an expert in a certain area, but then you quickly kind of branch out into areas where you're not an expert, right? So like, say you're very good at working with vector databases. Okay, well, are you an expert in chunking strategies for documents? Maybe not, right? And so you start to get around all these. Are you an expert in prompt engineering as you put stuff into? And so you start to, when you put these systems together, there's so many different areas of expertise. Each one has, downstream effects. You need to be good at a lot of things. So it does become quite complex, and you need to kind of have the expertise in that end-to-end system.
Yeah, and let's kind of dive in a little bit to the embeddings, which you're alluding to in vector databases. You
Mhm.
will take your enterprise data and load it into a vector database. And what happens there, if I understand it correctly, is you're converting text into numeric values, vectors to be precise. So a point and a trajectory and a length, basically. And
Yep.
then in that vector database, you have these vectors that represent concepts in the linguistic world, like dogs and cats and cars and things of this nature. So what happens is it's kind of a consensus engine, but it's also something that facilitates similarity searches. So what you're doing is you're populating this vector database with your enterprise data so that your RAG model, as we've talked about, retrieval augmented generation, your RAG model is weighted in favor of your enterprise data. And that's going to greatly increase the accuracy of the answers you get when you send in your prompts, right, Ryan?
Yeah. So when you ask a question, correct. So when you ask a question, what it's first doing is it's vectorizing your question as well, and then it's projecting that question against all of your vectorized data to ultimately find matches between the question that you're asking and the underlying data. It is then pulling back those snippets of text or documents or whatever kind of pieces of information that you ultimately want to bring back. And then when you bring those back, you're pushing them into a large language model and you're saying, large language model, here is the relevant data. Here is my question. Provide a concise answer to my question. And then the system, the large language model, the GPT model, is ultimately reading through it and synthesizing that text that was input into it into a single answer in response to the user question. So it's based on the enterprise data versus based on knowledge that was trained or captured from a training on an open internet.
Right. And that's the key, right? So you're providing the raw meat, if you will, the raw material to the engine to spin up the words that explain something. And in doing so, you're just using the large language model for its text generative abilities, right, Ryan?
Correct. Yeah, you're using it for reading through, understand this information, generate a new and novel answer based on the information that I just provided. But importantly, though, a kind of a second step here, because I don't want to say that just inputting enterprise data into a system will completely eliminate hallucinations. A lot of times these systems, or sometimes rather, they will still hallucinate. So you need to check answers as they come out of the large GPT model as well to confirm that it actually is only being generated from the underlying data source.
Yeah. And there are lots of different ways you can build these RAG models. So this came out of Facebook, I believe, or Meta, I guess it's called these days. And it was designed for this express purpose to ground your answers in truth, which is what you want to get when you ask these questions. So there are different ways you can do a RAG model, and you can have multiple steps. So on the way back, you can have a governance type layer that double checks things and says, okay, now look back at this and make sure that we did this correctly. That's basically what it is, right? It's almost like a check and balance that you build into your workflow. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. And so in that instance, you are using the language model for the generation piece. And so you use the vector database for the information retrieval of relevant content, push that into a GPT model to generate text. Then you can have these other modules just to double check the GPT model's answer
Right.
and confirm that that's only being generated from the underlying text versus some subreddit somewhere out on the internet
Yeah,
about
yeah.
your product.
That's right. I've heard that they were trained on Reddit, so
Yeah, of course.
that can add a couple interesting curveballs. But Alex, I'll throw it back over to you. That curation is an important part, but it's always been an important part. I mean, one of the, I think, misconceptions about this whole new era of large language models is that they have to be 100% correct or there's no value. Well, the old way of doing things was not 100% correct. You have to get to a certain critical mass of accuracy, so ideally like 90, 95%. But curation has always been part, and it will remain a part of this process too going forward, right, Alex?
Absolutely. And let me add more to what you said, Ryan, so that you mentioned data hallucination, but there is also a concept of data poisoning and data quality. And it's according to IBM, you only need to to have access to hundreds of percent. It's like .01 of the data to make sure your model to access to the model, so the model will produce different results. And yes, you need a curation. because it will ensure its work the way it's supposed to work. Because if you think about let's really use drug discovery or fraud detection based on this bank statement, the results can be significant and it will have significant impact on the overall business outcome. Let's say, people who are not supposed to get account get account. Drug discovery, maybe good drug will not get developed.
Talking all things AI and large language models and answers. Isn't that what we've always wanted? Answers from our data? And wow, have things changed. So we're talking to Ryan Welsh, Field CTO of Qlik, and Alex Kangoun, CEO of Athena Solutions today. And both of these gentlemen have a lot of experience in this space. Natural language processing, again, not new, but newly attractive and newly innovative, newly changing how we do this whole industry of decision support. And that's really the aha moment for me. And I'll throw this over to Ryan Welsh to comment on. But I view this hurdle that we've just jumped across of being able to use natural language queries on the expanse of our corporate data to get very relevant answers and have their citations for where the answers came from. I think this is frankly a quantum leap, and I think it's really going to change how we interact with data in a much more compelling and positive way. But what do you think, Ryan?
I absolutely agree. And so any time, what's pretty interesting is anytime you teach a machine to understand natural language in a better way, whether it's the syntax of language, the semantics of language, the pragmatics of language, anytime you kind of make pretty significant improvements, which is what we've done with large language models, you just completely change the interface with computers. And so the primary way that we interface with each other as people is natural language. We don't do it with pictures and other things. And so now that systems can actually have a better understanding of language, everything we do, I think personally, is going to be in this natural language interface with machines.
Yeah, that's just such a big deal. And Alex Kangoun, I'll throw it over to you. We joked that you've been through all the tribulations and trials of the last 25 years or so in the data world, and all of a sudden, and one of the best quotes I've heard to describe this is, it used to be that you had to learn how to talk machine language to talk to a machine, like SQL, the structured query language. If you know SQL, you can ask some questions of a database. Now you don't have to know that anymore. You can just use English words or French or German or whatever and ask questions of your data. That's a huge change. I mean, that's going to increase the usage of this kind of process and this technology, I have to think, by 10, 20, 100-fold. What do you think, Alex?
I'm a little bit selfish in this regard. I'm looking to automate things that I don't like to do, like repeatable tasks over and over I have to do. And I mean, in general, it's the validation, data review, looking for the commonality of discovering fraud. So you can train machine to do it better than human. But then human have to be involved anyway to overseeing and validating, looking at the results, dealing with hallucination, dealing with like validation and like overseeing. So your part, it's like, okay, if I'll get it, great. But for now, just looking for more time to out of my day to get through all the tasks that are repeatable and can be automated and it can be coded.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I'll throw it over to Ryan. There is this narrative in the media, and I've got an expression I use, that the narrative is always wrong because it's a story. It's not the real world, it's a story about the world. And the media tends to buy into hype cycles, get all excited, and then get to the point where they overreact when it goes down. And so it's a little bit disingenuous, especially mainstream consumer media, right? Trade press is a bit different because you have to be more serious and focused. And that's, of course, what we try to do on our shows because we're trade press. We're business media, basically, as opposed to consumer media. But in consumer media, the story is, oh, the red-eyed robots, AI is going to take over the world, all the jobs are going to go away. And, to the point that Alex just made and you made earlier, humans are going to be a part of this conversation forever and should be and need to be for the curation, for the modification, for the redesign. So it's not that that jobs are just going to go away, but it's that jobs are going to change. And what's the old line I heard, that it's not so much that AI will take away jobs, it's just that people who don't learn how to use AI will be replaced by people who do. What do you think, Ryan?
Yeah, I totally agree. I will also add to your comment, though, that people in the AI community often don't help the mainstream media understand the limitations of these technologies. And
Right.
so, you know, you have a lot of really smart people out there saying we're a year away from artificial general intelligence. I mean, that is, in my mind, a pretty insane comment. And if true, then all the stuff that they're saying, we do need to prepare pretty urgently for
Right.
pretty significant changes in the labor force. I personally think they're way off in their predictions, and we're not even close to artificial general intelligence. But we are making very big leaps along that path towards artificial and general intelligence. And I do think people need to get accustomed to using AI tools to accelerate their productivity. And I agree that, you know, people that become really good at using AI in their workflows are going to replace the people that aren't good at using AI within their workflow.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. You know, as I sit here and think about it, and I think you're right, by the way, about these predictions of AI waking up and, you know, the singularity as they've talked about and things of this nature. I don't think that's anytime soon, in part because it's simply not sentient. They look like they're sentient. They carry the appearance of sentience because they can give you this picture perfect prose on complicated questions. And it seems to know these things. It doesn't know anything. It just basically has, and it's not even that it has these models have absorbed the text in actual strings of text. It's just that they've modified their weights and balances in the parameters, of which there are billions. So in that sense, it is similar to how the human brain works, but that was always the idea with neural networks and with deep learning. It was always, we're always trying to approximate how people think about things. But nonetheless, it is just a very fancy machine that looks to be sentient, but certainly isn't. But what I'm thinking to myself is, this layer is going to be the new interface through which we engage with our enterprise software for decision
Mm.
making. And so that layer becomes very important. And there are a lot of things you can do inside of that layer. So when we talk about RAG, for example, governance gets baked into RAG, security is baked into RAG,
Yeah.
data quality gets baked into RAG. So in that sense, we are seeing this really, what I think is going to be a dramatic shift in the IT landscape in your tech stack and what it does and how all that operates. What do you think about that, Ryan?
Yeah, I agree. It's kind of like this system of intelligence that sits between the user interface and the data repositories that you're ultimately accessing, right? And so, like, if you think about analytics, we would traditionally find the right data, present that data to you in a user interface that's visualizations, right? Because the system couldn't communicate with you, the best medium of communication was a visualization. Well, now if we actually pass that data to, instead of through the visualization, into a large language model and tell it to synthesize the answer to the question, we're basically doing the same thing. And so we're accessing the right information, we're passing it somewhere, either through a visualization, but now to a large language model, and that language model now providing an answer to you in natural language. I think the large majority of us out there would prefer the answer in natural language versus a visualization. So I do think that these natural language interfaces are going to be the, you know, primary way that people interact with data. But the key piece is you got to be really good at accessing the right enterprise data. So you got to have the data governance in place, you got to have the business intelligence platform in place, and then with that you can layer on the natural language interface.
Yeah, that's right. Alex, go ahead.
No, I just want to add to what you're saying, that it's come from practical example. We use testing with AI for code generation, for light software implementation, and it worked well where it's simple cases. It worked well. When it's complex cases, what we end up providing team instruction, list of instruction, how to talk to model. So it's like we're replacing one complex language with another, like, okay, if you want to ask this,
That's
use that.
funny.
And it was like a big success. People like it. So no. to support your point, we're not ready. We're not there yet. We're trying, but we're not completely there.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be an ongoing process as we deploy these technologies and get deeper into it all. We do have a couple good questions from our audience. I'll throw one over to Ryan maybe. One attendee is asking about forms, which is a semi-structured data basically. So you've got unstructured data like Word documents, you've got structured data in relational databases, and you have this semi-structured data like data in forms. How would Qlik Answers deal with that kind of data?
Yeah, it really depends on the form and ultimately the data ingestion pipeline to turn that form into a relevant vector into a vector database. And so sometimes people say forms and it's quite literally like a structured table. Some people say forms and it's 1/4 of the page is a structured table and the rest is actually like more long form text. And so these vectorization methods do better with long form text versus a structured table on a form that I'm then putting into a text, because there's really not a lot of context. And so honestly, it really comes down to what does the form ultimately look like. If it's highly structured form, it won't be so great. If it's a less structured form, it'll be fine.
Yeah, that's a good point. And we got a couple other interesting questions here in the audience. We'll get to those before the show is out today. But there is also the side that Ryan mentioned earlier, that sometimes people in the Silicon Valley world and the AI world don't do a good enough job explaining to the media what these things do and don't do. And I've seen on LinkedIn all sorts of posts of people giving ChatGPT these very complex math problems or word problems, and then they're like, "Oh, look, it didn't do a good job." I'm thinking, that's a misuse of the tool. It is a text generator. It is not a reasoning engine, although I think that we are going to see layers of that built in over time. I think you're going to see emphasis, I'm sure they're working on this right now, of reasoning engines, so problem solving around challenges. I mean, we're seeing some of that with this discussion around AI agents or agentic AI, as some folks describe it. But Ryan, I'll throw that first over to you and then maybe to Alex to comment on what do you think about all that?
Yeah, I agree. Reasoning is going to continue to be important. One area that I would really push on, though, is the representation. And so is the representation of a neural network, and specifically a transformer-based architecture, ideal for doing really good reasoning, right? And so people throw around reasoning and forget that there's all types of reasoning. They just say these systems are good at reasoning, right? So there's abductive, there's deductive, there's analogical, inductive reasoning. And so I think to have a really good reasoning system, you might actually need to create a new architecture that is actually a hybrid symbolic system and a neural architecture, something that a lot of researchers are looking into or calling kind of neurosymbolic AI. But reasoning is going to improve on these large language models. I guess I question if the reasoning can get to a level of folks saying we then get to an AGI.